passer that the running game really lacked from things they had done in the past. So it'll be interesting, I think, for Ohio State to see if they can get that running game back on track this year and go back to what they were the 3 or 4 years before Dwayne Haskins took over last year.
Tony, we talked a little bit about this game earlier, but the big game tonight, the Canes and Florida. Canes not ranked, but a lot of people think they're on the way to a comeback.
Yeah, and it seems like the last couple of years, Miami's been up and down, up and down. I really like Florida this year. They started obviously ranked 8th in the country. Felipe Franks is a guy that took some major strides. It seems like it's been a rotation of quarterbacks transferring in, transferring out, not being able to play well for Florida. But Florida's that surprising SEC team that I understand they're starting 8th, but whenever you think about the SEC, it's obviously Alabama first. But Florida's got a really good team. They've got a favorable schedule. They'll get Auburn at home. Yes, they got to go on the road to LSU, but they get Georgia at home as well, and they don't have to face Alabama. This is a Florida team that I don't think they're going to win out, but there's a chance they could only lose one game and be right in the contention, barring injury, of course. And Miami's right there in the ACC, too. They're a team that, you look at what the ACC brings, and you're going to have decent teams. Wake Forest comes to mind as one of those teams that people might not think about as good as they are, but they're going to be. But Miami, another favorable schedule this year. They've got a chance to really make some noise and make it to a decent bowl. They'll get Virginia Tech at home. That's a tough one. They got to go at Florida State, and they get Louisville at home as well. So Miami's got a really favorable schedule to be able to make strides this year and get back to a bowl after winning the Camping World Bowl last year.
Mo, let's get right into the Alabama conversation because we can't wait to get into the conversation about Alabama. Again, they open up, I believe they open up against Duke down in Georgia. What are your thoughts? Alabama 2019-2020, we got to talk about them. Let's get it over with.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. Saban this year, obviously, Tua Tagovailoa is the starting quarterback, but you don't have that safety net in Jalen Hurts who transferred to Oklahoma. Obviously, Alabama always gets most of the recruits that they want. But, it'll be a fun year. Tua Tagovailoa, it's kind of the tank for Tua in the NFL. So, what kind of pressure does he feel to perform this year as he looks to be the number 1 pick? And a lot of times with this quarterback that we have, a lot of times looking forward to being the number 1 pick, sometimes those guys tend to fall off a little bit. We've seen in the past with a couple of the USC guys. So it'll be an interesting year for Alabama. I think they're going to be tough, like always. It probably, if I had to put my money on 2 teams, I'd probably put it on Alabama and Clemson to come down to those. I'm going to be interested in it.
Tony, what about number 1 Clemson versus Georgia Tech?
Yeah, the ACC is a good conference, and I like Clemson. I think you're going to have the number 1 player in the country. You're going to have a schedule that really bodes well for you. You start with Georgia Tech next week. Then you got a couple tough matchups. It always seems like Texas A&M's right there, and that's a tough start. Then you got to go on the road to number 22 Syracuse, and the Carrier Dome, as we know, is not the greatest place to play if you're a road team. But other than that, it should be a roll through the season. I think Clemson is going to have a great year. Trevor Lawrence is a stud. We'll see if Justin Ross can step up. We saw what Amari Rodgers has done. This is a football team that I think is going to continue to just roll through the schedule, but we'll see. That's a tough schedule to start with Georgia Tech, who was down last year, but that rushing attack can really get to you. And then you get Texas A&M coming to town. Then you go at Syracuse. So 2 of your first 3 games are against top 25 opponents.
We lost Mo somehow in the world of technology, so hopefully he will call us back. Let's go to number 3, Georgia. Georgia Vanderbilt. This is going to be a fun SEC matchup to watch, no matter what the outcome is. But you got to worry about the Bulldogs this year, and a lot of things will come to fruition when they play Notre Dame as well. But Georgia taking on Vanderbilt, going to be a fun SEC matchup to watch.
Well, like you mentioned, that Notre Dame game against Georgia has to be scheduled coming up on the 21st, 2 top 10 teams. I like Georgia. They were great last year, as we know. I think the last 2 times they played Alabama, they've had a lead in that game for all but like 2 minutes and 17 seconds, and they're 0-2 against Alabama. Can they finally get over that hump? Can they finally push forward? It's a favorable schedule outside of that Notre Dame game. You got to go at the Swamp to Florida. That'll be a tough one in November. You got to go at Auburn, but they get Texas A&M at home. Georgia's a team that I think can take that next step and be able to knock off Alabama in the SEC and find themselves in that Final Four.
So as we keep on moving down the top 25, and certainly a lot of teams are just kind of what we would want to call practice games for these. Ohio State and Florida Atlantic would be one of them. LSU versus Georgia Southern. But certainly let's take a look at the Tigers, number 6 LSU.
Yeah, I like to call this the we're going to make some money portion of the schedule for the likes of Georgia Southern and the Tennessee Martins of the world because, as you know, these big schools, they want a couple extra wins on their schedule. So if you're LSU, you just call up the Georgia Southern and say, hey, why don't you drive down? We'll write you a pretty hefty check. I think it was, and don't quote me on this, but it was 3 or 4 years ago, Indiana State, the Sycamores, Division II here in Indiana in Terre Haute, got paid $900,000 to go to Auburn, and that allowed those kids to get new jerseys. I like LSU. It'll be a tough one next week when they play Texas. All eyes are going to be on that game. They get Florida at home. They get Auburn at home. You got to go at number 2, Alabama. I would not be surprised if LSU wrapped up the season with only one loss.
You're absolutely right, and there's certainly one to keep your eyes on. And we talked a little bit with Mo before you joined us, and that is Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines. Again, they play Middle Tennessee. Not overly concerned about a win or a loss with them, but at the same time, Jim Harbaugh had better be concerned whether or not his ass is going to be on the hot seat this year.
Well, there's no doubt about it. I mean, it's got to be on every resume you sign. Or every time you sign on as a Michigan head coach, it's got to be circled. You need to beat Ohio State. That is the bottom line. You get that game this year on your home turf. There's no excuses. You have to go out and get that done. It's another tough schedule. You go next week to number 19 Wisconsin. 2 weeks from now, you play number 20 Iowa. You got to go at Penn State. Notre Dame comes to town. Michigan State's always a tough out. They're ranked in the top 20. But then you get that big one on the 30th of November against Ohio State. If you're Jim Harbaugh, you got to take care of business because you've got, 3 of your 4 games against ranked opponents are at home, and you have to take care of business against Ohio State if you want to keep your job. The Capital One Bowls, the Citrus Bowls, that doesn't do it for Michigan football. They'll let you get a bye with that for 1 or 2 years if you don't beat Ohio State. But the bottom line, Michigan football expects, no matter who you are, to beat Ohio State and to get to the major bowls.
Joining us now is our official college football contributor, Rick Riggin. Rick, I know you got called into work, and thank you for taking some time to call in the last minute. And joining us also Tony Donohue of the Tony D podcast. Mo texted me, said he's driving and he's out of phone signal. But real quickly, Rick, welcome back, college football. Let's get your thoughts on the top 25. We were just talking a little bit about how important it is for Michigan to have it and to be in a major bowl, and that Jim Harbaugh could very much be in the hot seat. But what are your thoughts as we start the 2019-2020 college football season, Rick?
Well, much to my despise of Michigan, I will say that it is great for college football if Michigan is one of those elite teams. I hope my work truck here isn't too loud for everybody because, I have a day job and sometimes that spills into the weekend. But I will say it's great for It's great for college football for Michigan to be one of those elite teams because they are one of these blue bloods of college football. And as far as the top 25 goes, I think we're going to see more of the same. I know we talked about this last week. It's going to be Clemson and Alabama. I mean, every other team that you go down the list on has some sort of question mark, a new head coach, new quarterback, something along there. They lost a lot of their top players from a year ago to the NFL or whatever. Clemson and Alabama just aren't like that. And if they lost some great talent, but they bring back both their outstanding quarterbacks, and of course they have their longtime head coaches, which are probably the 2 best head coaches in college football.
And Rick, we appreciate you taking some time to join us, and you don't have to lie to us. We know you're out there on the Ohio River on your pontoon boat, getting ready to jump on your jet ski. So that's okay. We get it. We understand. Tony, what are your thoughts overall? I mean, as we wrap up the college football segment this week, but we still got Texas to talk about, and we still got a few of the other top 10 teams to talk about. But when we look into the top 10, and certainly let's not forget about Penn State and Northwestern, even though they're not in the top 10, they're certainly in the top 25. Give us a 365-degree look at the top 25, Tony.
Yeah, you've got. Well, first of all, it's crazy that college football is already here, and you get started with a couple games today. Michigan, as we mentioned, you got to beat Ohio State, as we know, and as was mentioned, it's great for college football if teams like Florida, LSU, Michigan, Texas are back in the hunt. We'll see what Oregon can do. They're going to have that big matchup against Auburn to start the season. Oregon's a fast, up-paced team. Same with Washington. Remember Washington last year was a really good team. They had a great defense. They had couple top, two-round players. Can they sustain what they had last year? And then can the Pac-12 prove on an even playing field in a bowl game that they can compete? They deserve to be in that conversation. They were talking about going to noon games on the East Coast or whatever so that people can see them. But the bottom line is that when Pac-12 teams normally get to a big bowl, whether it's the Rose Bowl or get to play, in the college football playoff, they don't perform. So we'll see if the Pac-12 can step up. Washington State's always a good team out west. I really like Oklahoma. There's a lot of questions there. Can Hurst step up and take over for Kyler Murray? But remember, a year ago we were saying, well, Kyler Murray will never be able to put up the numbers that Baker Mayfield did, and then he did. So that system, I think, fits well for Hurst, and I think Oklahoma's going to be a force to be reckoned with this season.
Oklahoma's definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with, and we talk about Oklahoma year after year after year, and we'll see what happens. But it just seems like unless you're in the SEC, Rick, for the most part, you're not getting any love, especially if you're out there on the West Coast where a lot of people aren't getting to see your games. You're not getting a lot of love when it comes to the big bowls. Rick, we'll kind of give you the final word here, but what are your thoughts on the top 25 as we roll into 2019-2020?
Well, I'm glad Tony brought up the Pac-12, and a lot of people, a lot of the experts, I wouldn't call myself as an expert, but I don't have this team as a dark horse. But a lot of the experts do have Utah as a dark horse and potentially a playoff team. I think Utah is going to win the Pac-12, be the best team in the Pac-12 this year. Watch out for Washington State. I don't think it's going to be a good year for Stanford, but he's right. These Pac-12 teams get late in the season and get in the bowl games, and they underperform. They just do not perform. I think Oregon is going to take another step up with Mario Cristobal and Justin Herbert there at quarterback. But I do think this is the year for Utah in the Pac-12.
Rick, we'll let you get back to work there, but where can people find your work and your masterpieces? And I know you'll be joining us throughout the 2019-2020 season for college football.
Yes, sir, man. Always fun to be on the show, and I could be a talking head for college football, which is the greatest of all sports, and you can find me on Twitter at Riggin_Rick.
All right, Rick. You have yourself a good weekend. We'll talk with you soon.
Yes, thank you. See you guys.
Tony, one more final thought from you as we look at this top five, and I really look at Georgia, and I really look at Alabama, and I look at Clemson, and we look at the fact of what we talked about, the bowl love, if you will. I mean, if you're not in those top five, it is so hard for you to even get looked at by the bowl committee. Do they have it figured out with the playoff system and the way that they've got it now, or do we still need some improvements in the way that we select bowl games and championship games, particularly playoffs?
I think a lot of people would like to see maybe 6 teams and then having, the top 2 have some sort of a bye week or 8 teams. And you knew when this went to the playoff a few years ago, you were half 4. People are always going to have a better suggestion or a complaint. As far as the ranking goes right now, Clemson and Alabama are probably going to stay up towards the top. We know that because it seems like when these 2 teams, if they do suffer a loss, Tom, they don't fall as far down the standings as what maybe a Michigan will or an LSU if they suffer a loss. When Alabama loses and they're ranked in the top 2, they only fall to 3rd or 4th or 5th, and 2 weeks later they're back up into the top 2. But it seems like when teams like Michigan or Florida or LSU or even Notre Dame sometimes fall, they go from 3, 4, 5th in the country down to 14th or 15th, and that almost buries them and eliminates them from the college football playoff. That's why, we get to the end of the year and we've seen teams like UCF and we've seen, we've seen smaller conference, non-Power 6 schools really, I think, should have a chance to win the national championship. We saw, UCF 2 years ago. Boise seems to always be in the running sometimes for